The morning sun lit up the small town of Plesto, but for Karoline Leavitt, the day already felt heavy. She stood in her kitchen, sipping black coffee, her phone buzzing on the counter beside a stack of printed legal papers. Today, she was supposed to handle a simple contract dispute involving her family's truck dealership. Nothing major, just a misunderstanding over payment terms. She had all the documents ready, even saved photos of the original contract and the invoices. Karoline wore a smart navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her blonde hair neatly tied back. She wasn't going to the White House today, but she still dressed like someone who took every task seriously. That was her reputation. Young, sharp, and always prepared. As Donald Trump's former press secretary, she had faced reporters, angry mobs, and live TV debates. A local court case was nothing. Her BMW waited in the garage, shining like a trophy. She drove calmly, NPR playing softly on the radio. Then her phone screen lit up. A call from Michael Reynolds, senior advisor at the White House. Her heart skipped. Michael didn't call for small talk. "Karoline, sorry for the early call," he said quickly. "We've got a crisis with the Gulf of America decree. The media's tearing it apart. We need your statement now." She gripped the steering wheel. The Gulf of America decree, Trump's move to rename the Gulf of Mexico, had sparked massive backlash, and she was the face defending it. "How long do I have?" she asked. 2 hours max. I'm sending the press questions. We need something airtight." "Okay," she said, already scanning for a place to pull over. Karoline parked outside a quiet coffee shop, opened her laptop, and tethered her phone. Her fingers moved fast, analyzing press queries and drafting responses. The questions were brutal. Is this decree legally enforceable? Is the administration rewriting geography for politics? She didn't flinch. Her notes were precise. Her tone was cool and strategic. Time passed without her noticing. When she looked at the clock, her stomach dropped. She had 15 minutes to reach the courthouse. She emailed Michael a rough draft, jumped into her car, and drove fast but careful. She hated being late. It wasn't just bad manners. It was a weakness, and Karoline Leavitt didn't show weakness. She arrived at the courthouse 7 minutes late. Inside, the courtroom buzzed with low voices. Judge Edward Grayson, 62, sat tall in his black robe. His gray hair combed back, eyes scanning the room like a hawk. He was known for being strict. He liked control, and he didn't like people who challenged it. "All rise," the bailiff called out. Karoline slipped in quietly, hoping not to draw attention. But the judge saw her immediately. "You," he said sharply. "Step forward." Karoline paused, then walked to the podium. Her heels clicked on the floor, echoing through the silent room. "You are Miss Leavitt?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Yes, Your Honor." "You were scheduled to appear at 9 a.m. It is now 9:07. "I understand, sir. I was caught in—" "I don't want excuses," he snapped. "This isn't a press briefing or a media circus. This is a court of law." Karoline stood straight, hands clasped in front of her. She didn't speak. She knew when silence had more power. The judge continued louder now. "In this courtroom, punctuality matters. Respect for this institution matters. You may be used to White House drama, but here you follow the rules." She looked around. The room was full. People on benches watched closely. A woman who had arrived late just before Karoline sat quietly, untouched. Karoline noticed. This wasn't about a late arrival. This was personal. Grayson didn't stop. "You think your role in Washington makes you special? You're just another citizen here, and citizens don't make their own rules." The clerk, Margaret Evans, typed nervously. She glanced at Karoline, then at the judge. Something didn't feel right. "I'm issuing a $500 fine for contempt," the judge said, slamming the gavel. Gasps rippled through the room. Karoline didn't flinch. She looked straight at him, eyes calm. Understood, Your Honor. But inside, her mind was racing. The fine was steep, too steep for a 7-minute delay. His words were too sharp, his tone too personal. She'd faced bias before in politics and media, but this felt different. This was from within the system, a courtroom, a judge. Margaret Evans hesitated before typing the fine into the record. Her fingers shook slightly. Karoline turned slowly, walking back to her seat. Her mind wasn't on the contract dispute anymore. She was thinking deeper now, about power, about bias, about the judge. And she was starting to wonder, was this really about a missed courtroom minute? Or something far bigger? The courtroom remained silent even after the gavel struck. Karoline sat down, back straight, expression unreadable. Around her, the other attendees shifted in their seats, murmuring quietly to one another. Some glanced, at her with sympathy, others with curiosity. The fine was unusually harsh, everyone knew it. But Judge Edward Grayson carried on as if nothing had happened. His voice returned to its neutral tone as he moved through the next case, but Karoline could still feel the echo of his words. The contempt fine wasn't about her tardiness. It was about something else, something unspoken. She flipped open her leather folder and reviewed the contract documents again, but her thoughts kept drifting back. She'd seen that tone before. In newsrooms, political debates, and press briefings, men who wanted to put her in her place because she was too young, too confident, or too close to power. But this was different. This wasn't public opinion. This was the law. And it had turned on her without warning. 2 seats behind her, a middle-aged woman whispered to her companion, "That's the Trump girl, isn't it?" Karoline heard. She was used to that label. It had followed her ever since she became the face of Trump's media strategy. To many, she was the architect of chaos. To others, a symbol of loyalty and strength. But labels didn't matter in a courtroom, or so she had believed. After 30 more minutes, Judge Grayson finally called her case. "Leavitt versus Plesto Auto Repair contract dispute," the clerk announced. Karoline stood and walked to the podium. This time, the judge didn't interrupt her. He simply stared down, glasses perched low on his nose, expression unreadable. She began calmly. "Your Honor, the dispute is over a service contract between my family's dealership and Plesto Auto. The contract specifies monthly maintenance, charges. However, the invoice provided doesn't align with the agreed-upon terms. I've brought physical copies and photographs for review." Grayson nodded slowly, but didn't ask for the documents. Instead, he leaned back in his chair. "Do you represent your family legally, Miss Leavitt?" "I do, sir," she said. "I am not a licensed attorney, but I'm here as the business representative, and I've consulted legal counsel." "Of course," he said with a slight smirk. "You've had some experience, I hear." A few quiet chuckles came from the benches. Karoline didn't react. "I'd be happy to submit the documents, Your Honor." He motioned for the bailiff to collect the papers. As the clerk and judge reviewed them, Karoline noticed something. Judge Grayson didn't really look at the contract. He skimmed, flipped a page, then set it down. "This is a minor discrepancy, Miss Leavitt," he said. "Frankly, it seems more a bookkeeping error than a matter for court. Why wasn't this resolved privately?" "It was attempted, sir. The repair shop refused to acknowledge the original terms and demanded additional payment." "I see." He tapped a pen against the desk. "You're aware that using court resources for small personal matters isn't typically recommended, especially for individuals with high public profiles." That was it. He had said it. Karoline understood now. This wasn't about lateness or contracts. It was about punishing her for who she was, how visible she'd become. "I am aware, Your Honor," she said, voice clear, "but I believe every citizen should have equal access to justice, regardless of their background or profession." The words hung in the air. Margaret, the court clerk, paused in her typing. Grayson narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He flipped through the documents once more and sighed. This matter is adjourned until next week. I'll need to review these materials further. Understood, Karoline said. She returned to her seat, feeling the tension in the room shift. Whispers started again. A few people nodded quietly in her direction. They had seen it too. The tone, the remarks, the selective enforcement. After a few more cases, Judge Grayson called a recess. Outside in the hallway, Karoline leaned against the cool marble wall and exhaled. Her phone buzzed, another message from Michael at the White House. Need you back online within the hour. Gulf of America coverage heating up. Call me. She typed back quickly. Court adjourned. We'll call shortly. Just as she hit send, she noticed someone approaching. It was Margaret Evans, the court clerk. Her face was hesitant, but her voice was firm. Miss Leavitt, she said quietly, I shouldn't be saying this, but you're not wrong. The fine, the comments, it wasn't procedure. It was personal. Karoline blinked. Thank you, she said slowly. I've worked here 12 years, Margaret continued. He treats people differently, especially women, especially strong ones. That was all. Margaret turned and walked away before anyone could see her. Karoline stood still for a long moment. Her heart was steady, but her mind was spinning. This wasn't just a courtroom misunderstanding. It was a signal. Someone didn't want her voice heard. Not in the press, not in politics, and certainly not in a place where truth should matter most. But they... The courthouse steps were nearly empty as Karoline walked outside. But her mind was crowded with questions. The sun was high now, casting hard shadows on the pavement. She paused at her car, staring at the reflection in the tinted window. Behind her composed expression, something was shifting. The fine, the comments, the way the judge handled her case, it all pointed to something bigger than a personal slight. Her phone buzzed again. Michael Reynolds. President's briefing moved to 3 p.m. Need a finalized draft on Gulf Decree response ASAP. Karoline tapped out a quick reply. On it. She opened the trunk and pulled out her laptop, balancing it on the passenger seat while the car idled for air conditioning. As she typed, her focus returned. Political turbulence was her element. That courtroom may have shaken her, but this, crafting, narratives, defending policies, shifting media storms, this was where she excelled. But then, just as she was about to send the draft, her phone rang again. Unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. Karoline Leavitt, she said. A low voice responded. Miss Leavitt, this is Detective Paul Gerard, State Oversight Division. I'd like to ask you a few questions privately about Judge Edward Grayson. Karoline froze. I'm sorry, what is this about? It's not an official inquiry, not yet. But let's just say, you're not the first person who's raised concerns about his conduct. We monitor high-risk judicial behavior, and we've had our eye on Judge Grayson for some time. And you're calling me because of what happened this morning? Exactly. But not just that, Gerard replied. He's fined 27 individuals for contempt in the last 3 years. 21 of them were women, many with high-profile ties or public reputations. His pattern is statistically abnormal. You stood your ground today. We took notice. Karoline leaned back in the driver's seat, heart now racing for an entirely different reason. Are you asking me to report him? I'm asking if you'd be willing to talk, off the record. We believe Judge Grayson has misused his bench in subtle, targeted ways for years. But we need someone credible, someone visible. Karoline was silent for a moment. I'll think about it, she said at last. And if I say yes, then you'll meet us discreetly, and we'll show you just how deep this goes. The line went dead. Karoline stared out the windshield, her mind spinning. She had walked into the courtroom expecting a routine dispute. She had walked out with a fine, a warning, and now possibly a key to something much larger. She pulled away from the courthouse and drove toward her townhome on the edge of Plaistow. The quiet streets and trimmed hedges felt oddly distant now, too calm, too safe, like a mask. When she arrived, she threw her bag on the couch and sat at the kitchen island. The smell of brewed coffee still lingered from the morning. She opened her laptop again, but this time her fingers didn't move. Instead, she replayed the courtroom scene in her head, moment by moment. Grayson's tone, the hesitation of the court clerk, the way no one questioned his authority. She clicked into a secure folder on her desktop labeled Campaign Legal Archives. In it were hundreds of files from her time with Trump, debates, legal memos, opposition research, case studies on media narratives. It was here that she had trained herself, reading late into the night while others slept. This wasn't just about politics for her. It was about proving she belonged at the table, that her voice mattered. And now it might be time to use everything she had learned. She opened a blank document and typed, "The Pattern of Power, Investigating Judicial Bias in Small-Town America." Not for the press, not yet, but for herself. A record, a log, a case file. As she typed, her phone buzzed again, this time with a video link. It was from a conservative media outlet already reporting on the courtroom incident. Trump ally Karoline Leavitt fined in court? Was it political? She clicked play. The footage showed her walking out of the courthouse, her face calm, but her eyes focused. The voiceover speculated about a coordinated attack on Trump officials at the local level. She closed the video. She didn't need anyone to spin this for her. She was going to uncover the truth herself. And if that meant challenging a respected judge, pulling back the curtain on the legal system, and stepping into a new kind of war, so be it. Because Karoline Leavitt had just been underestimated again. And this time, they wouldn't see her coming. The town of Plaistow felt different the next morning, quiet, but watchful. Karoline Leavitt noticed it as soon as she stepped out of her home. The barista at the local cafe paused slightly before handing her the usual coffee. A passerby offered a polite nod, but held their gaze too long. Something had changed. Her courtroom incident had gone viral overnight. As she sipped her coffee, her phone pinged again. This time it wasn't Michael Reynolds or Detective Gerard. It was a short message from someone named Dahlia Chen, a journalist from the Republic Ledger, a centrist investigative outlet known for taking on both political sides. "Saw the court video, want to talk. We're tracking Grayson too, quietly." Karoline felt a chill, not from fear but from the strange comfort of confirmation. Another thread had emerged. This wasn't in her head. She replied, "Coffee at noon, not in Plaistow." By 11:50 a.m., she was seated at a corner booth of a small cafe just outside the county line. Dahlia Chen arrived a few minutes later. No notepad, no camera, just her phone turned upside down on the table. She was in her early 30s, sharp-eyed and clearly not here to waste time. "Grayson has a pattern," Dahlia began, taking a sip of tea. "And your case just made the pattern public. People are talking." "I didn't come here to be a whistleblower," Karoline replied calmly. "I'm still serving the White House. This isn't about me. It's about justice." Dahlia leaned in. "It is about you, because you're the first person with enough visibility and legal knowledge to push back. And because the judge treated you like you were just another young mouthpiece for Trump. That's the exact blind spot he operates from." Karoline didn't flinch. "What do you have?" Dahlia slid, her phone across the table, screen now on. Photos, court transcripts, redacted police reports. One name came up again and again, Judge Edward Grayson. Similar complaints, similar rulings. One even showed a recorded complaint from the court clerk, Margaret Evans, hinting at uncomfortable biases, but never filed officially. There's one more thing, Dahlia said. A sealed case from 6 years ago, involving a whistleblower. It was buried. We can't unseal it without a formal complaint. But if you trigger an inquiry, then everything opens up, Karoline finished. Dahlia nodded. Karoline closed her eyes briefly. She hadn't come here expecting a full-scale takedown operation, but now it was staring her in the face. That afternoon, Karoline returned to her home office and stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop. The folder marked Pattern of Power was still open. She added a new document, Potential Witness List. First, Margaret Evans, the clerk. Second, Officer Raymond Burke, a retired sheriff deputy who once filed an anonymous statement about Grayson's partiality. Third, Kendra Moss, the woman in the courtroom who'd arrived late before Karoline, but received no fine. Each entry was linked to a date, a case number, and a note. Karoline wasn't building an article. She was building a prosecution map. Suddenly, her email chimed. Subject, Urgent, CBS interview request. From Stephen Colbert's production team. We've seen the footage. America's watching. We'd like to invite Karoline Leavitt to appear on The Late Show this Friday. Unedited conversation. Your terms. Let us know. Karoline leaned back, arms crossed. Stephen Colbert. The one man who never missed a chance to mock her former boss. Or her, for that matter. But this time, it wasn't satire. It was a spotlight. One she could use. If she played it right, this wasn't just about Grayson. This was about making the entire system pay attention. That night, Karoline received another call. It was Detective Gerard again. We have surveillance footage. Grayson met privately last week with a donor from the Conservative Legal Association, someone with direct ties to one of the contractors in your dispute. Karoline gritted her teeth. You think the court fine was personal? I think it was more than that, Gerard said. I think it was a message. And you weren't supposed to read between the lines. But Karoline had. Every jab, every smirk, every misplaced ruling. They underestimated her again, and now, as she prepared to go national, she wasn't just ready to expose a judge. She was ready to burn the whole facade down, one fact at a time. Because now it wasn't just about what happened in that courtroom. It was about why. The lights in Studio 6B of The Late Show flickered softly above the stage. The audience buzzed with anticipation, but behind the curtain, Karoline Leavitt was calm, almost unnaturally so. She had faced down journalists, lawyers, even heads of state. But this was something else. Live television, prime time, no edits, no filters. Stephen Colbert's voice boomed over the monitors as he wrapped up a segment on politics. The cameras panned to the audience. The band played a short jazz riff, and then her name. And now, please welcome Karoline Leavitt. Applause. And murmurs filled the studio as Karoline stepped into the spotlight. She wore a sleek, midnight blue suit, not flashy, but commanding. Her hair was tied back, minimal jewelry, expression focused. Every step was measured, every breath deliberate. Colbert stood and greeted her with his signature grin, but she noticed the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't a casual interview. This was an ambush dressed as comedy. They sat. The claps faded. The cameras zoomed in. Karoline, Colbert began lightly. Great to have you. I assume the traffic from Plesto Municipal Court wasn't too bad? Laughter from the audience. She smiled politely. No worse than Washington traffic. Though the court's sense of humor could use some work. Another polite chuckle from the crowd. Colbert raised an eyebrow. Well, your courtroom video is all over the internet. Some people are calling it a meltdown. Others say it's proof you're the next Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I'm guessing you prefer the second. Karoline leaned in. I prefer facts. I was fined for being 3 minutes late while another person, also late, wasn't even noticed. That's not law. That's ego. The studio grew quieter. Colbert smirked. Are you suggesting the judge had a political agenda? I'm saying bias isn't always loud. Sometimes it hides in timing, tone, and who gets punished. Colbert nodded, then flipped to a blue note card. Well, since we're on the topic of hidden things, let me ask about this. He held up a document. It was a still shot of a classified memo, heavily redacted but recognizable. The header: Special Briefing, Gulf of America Response Protocol. Colbert looked serious now. This was leaked an hour ago. It suggests you advised the White House not to disclose intelligence regarding foreign diplomatic reactions to the Gulf Decree. Is that true? The room froze. The crew, the audience, even the floor manager stood still. Karoline didn't blink. I advised the White House to avoid premature disclosure until verification. That's called caution, not suppression. But this line here, KL recommends minimal public engagement to avoid blowback. Doesn't that sound like political damage control? She turned to him fully. You mean like calling a war a military operation or branding inflation as transitory? Words matter, but intent matters more. Colbert wasn't expecting that. The audience leaned in. She continued, voice unwavering. If I wanted to manipulate truth, I'd be working PR in the private sector. But I chose government service. I chose to walk into biased courtrooms. I chose this show, knowing you'd try to twist the narrative. Because I believe in showing up. Silence. A beat too long. Then Karoline reached into her pocket. She unfolded a small sheet of paper and handed it to Colbert. The camera caught a glimpse, an excerpt from a sealed court complaint dated 6 years ago. The name Grayson appeared on it. This, she said, is a forgotten voice, one of many. I'm here because these people never had a platform. Colbert stared at the page. It was real. His face shifted from witty to wary. Where did you get this? He asked quietly. You'll find out soon, Karoline replied. A few people in the audience began clapping, tentatively, but genuinely. The band didn't play, the director didn't cut. No one moved. Karoline turned toward the camera. To those watching, if you've ever been silenced, talked down to, or written off because of your age, your gender, your politics, don't let that be the end of your story. Speak loudly. Because when truth walks in, power doesn't laugh, it flinches. The studio was dead silent. And for the first time in years, Stephen Colbert had no punchline. The aftershock from Karoline Leavitt's appearance on The Late Show spread like wildfire. By morning, hashtags like Leavitt silences Colbert, Grayson cover-up, and Gulf Decree scandal were trending worldwide. Clips of her final words, "When truth walks in, power doesn't laugh, it flinches," played across every network, both praised and vilified depending on the channel. But inside the Plesto Municipal Court building, the air was different, cold, controlled. Judge Edward Grayson arrived early that day, more rigid than usual. He walked past clerks and officers with a glare that silenced every whispered greeting. His office door slammed behind him. He had seen the interview. And more importantly, he had received a message, delivered in person that morning by 2 suited federal agents. They brought documents. Old ones. Karoline had filed a formal motion to unseal misconduct complaints against Grayson, cases buried. Years ago, never investigated, involving patterns of uneven sentencing, gender bias, and selective application of contempt fines. Most damaging of all, a sworn affidavit from Margaret Evans, Grayson's own clerk, detailing how she had once been ordered to change the timestamp on a defendant's file to justify a harsher penalty. That defendant? A young female lawyer. Not, unlike Karoline. The agents weren't just visiting. They were watching. Grayson felt cornered for the first time in decades. Meanwhile, Karoline sat in her home office, her phone buzzing non-stop with calls from news anchors, legal analysts, even White House aides. But she ignored them all. Her focus was on a legal brief she was preparing, not for show, not for politics, but for the next stage of her plan. At 11:47 a.m., her email pinged. Subject: Emergency court order. Judge Grayson recused. She didn't smile. There was no joy in this, just strategy and purpose. That afternoon, she walked back into the Plesto courthouse, not as a defendant, but as a litigant in a formal hearing to reverse the contempt charge and force a review of all similarly biased rulings by Grayson over the last 10 years. The courtroom was quieter than before. Margaret Evans gave her a small, respectful nod. Even the security guard outside held the door longer than usual. Karoline entered with the same midnight blue suit she wore on television, like armor. Her eyes scanned the room. Empty benches, a new judge on the bench, Judge Clara Voss, known for her strict adherence to fairness and an unimpeachable record. "Miss Leavitt," Judge Voss began, "the court recognizes your motion for judicial review and reversal of prior sanctions. I've reviewed the submitted material. You may proceed with your statement." Karoline stood tall. "Your Honor," she began clearly, "the issue here isn't about one missed court appearance. It's about a pattern, a system where certain people are treated as mistakes before they even open their mouths. What happened to me is nothing compared to what's happened to others, people without titles or cameras." She submitted her evidence, data on Grayson's contempt fines by gender, transcripts from similar cases, and, of course, Margaret Evans's affidavit. The judge listened carefully, taking notes. The press was barred from the courtroom, but that didn't stop the buzz outside. CNN trucks, Fox News vans, independent reporters with phones pointed at the courthouse doors, waiting. The hearing lasted 2 hours. At its end, Judge Voss leaned forward. "This court finds sufficient cause to overturn the previous contempt ruling and open a formal inquiry into judicial conduct during Judge Grayson's tenure." She paused. "The court also grants your motion to represent pro bono those who were unfairly fined under similar circumstances if they consent to your legal representation." Karoline nodded. She already had a list of 7 individuals. All of them had thought no one would ever listen. As she walked out of the courtroom, a wave of flashing cameras and shouted questions hit her. "Karoline, do you plan to sue the state? Are you going to run for office? What about the White House response to the Gulf memo leak?" She didn't answer any of them. Instead, she held up a manila folder. In large print, it read, "Equal Access Legal Initiative. Case Jiuzauza 1, Grayson." The message was clear. This wasn't about fame. This was about justice. In the distance, an email from the White House waited. Subject: Statement requested. Gulf decree fallout and resignation rumors. Karoline glanced at it, then tucked her phone away. She had more important things to do, because in the span of 2 days, Karoline Leavitt had gone from a courtroom defendant to the most dangerous woman in Washington. The press called it the reckoning in Plesto. Others referred to it as Leavitt's long game. But Karoline didn't care what they called it. She wasn't done. In Washington, the pressure was unbearable. The White House scrambled to contain fallout from the Gulf of America decree. International diplomats had called it provocative. NATO allies had quietly withdrawn cooperation on several joint projects. The president's approval rating had dipped sharply among moderates. The Oval Office needed Karoline back in her old role, damage control. But she refused the offer. She had other plans now. At her Georgetown apartment, now half converted into a war room, Karoline stood before a wall covered in photos, timelines, printed emails, legal dockets, and newspaper clippings. In the center, a name circled in red, Judge Edward Grayson, but surrounding it were others, judges, attorneys, and politicians, linked by one thing: abuse of power. What had started as a single contempt fine had become something else entirely. By the end of the week, the Washington Post ran a story titled, "She Flipped the Courtroom, Now She's Flipping the System." Karoline's equal access legal initiative was gaining momentum. Two former law clerks from different counties had reached out with their own sealed stories. A whistleblower from the state attorney general's office anonymously sent her copies of old, buried investigations. The web was getting wider. Then came the call she didn't expect. Margaret Evans, the longtime court clerk, the one who had quietly submitted that affidavit. She wanted to meet. They chose a quiet corner of a library in Old Town, away from reporters, microphones, and eyes. "I wasn't brave," Margaret began, her hands shaking slightly. "Not like you. I should have spoken up years ago." Karoline listened silently, waiting. Margaret leaned in. "Judge Grayson, he wasn't acting alone. There's a reason. He never got in trouble. His brother-in-law, he's on the State Judicial Review Board. Every complaint went to him first. Every red flag vanished." That was the missing link. Karoline's mind snapped into gear. It wasn't just bias. It was a network, a quiet, deliberate system to protect those in robes. By Monday morning, Karoline filed a motion to unseal a 2014 complaint dismissed by the review board. By Tuesday, it leaked to the media. By Wednesday, the governor of the state, once considered a Grayson ally, held a press conference calling for a full judicial ethics investigation. And on Thursday morning, Judge Edward Grayson resigned. The official statement cited health concerns and media pressure, but everyone knew the truth. His career had collapsed under the weight of a 27-year-old woman he once tried to embarrass in court. Still, Karoline wasn't celebrating. She was preparing. Because that same morning, the White House changed its tune. A leak surfaced showing they had considered letting Grayson preside over a proposed federal judicial appointment. The media frenzy turned inward. Reporters began asking, who else had been protected like him? How far did the rot go? Karoline gave her first public address since the resignation. Standing outside the Plesto courthouse, she spoke plainly. "I didn't come here to pick a fight with a judge. I came to resolve a contract dispute. But when someone in power decides, your voice doesn't matter. When they weaponize their office against you, you don't stay quiet. You push back, not just for yourself, but for everyone who doesn't get a second chance." The crowd erupted. Cameras rolled. Even the networks, who had once mocked her for being Trump's media puppet, now broadcasted her live, wall to wall. Then came the final moment. One last message, one last twist. A letter, hand-delivered by a young staffer from Capitol Hill. It bore the seal of the House Oversight Committee. Inside, Ms. Karoline Leavitt. "We are inviting you to testify before the House Committee on Government Accountability regarding judicial misconduct, media pressure, and political influence in local courts. Your insight is considered critical to proposed national reforms." She read the letter slowly. Then, for the first time in days, she smiled. The courtroom had tried to silence her. The media had tried to mock her. The system had tried to fine her into submission. But now? Now it was asking her to lead. The story wasn't over. It was just beginning.